Right. Welcome, Team OnCore. We've got an exciting guest on our podcast, one of the top instructors in the world, Jim McLean. He's been rated number 3 in the world for over 25 years. And going through your bio, Jim, kind of reminded me of that moment where Tiger and Phil were teeing off in 2002 in Eastlake, and the woman was going through Tiger's accomplishments on the tee. And at one point, Phil chimed in and was like, all right, we get it. And everyone just started laughing, but you've won every teaching award, and most of our listeners will be familiar with your name. What surprised me, and no offense to you, was just what an accomplished player you were too. I just always knew Jim as the instructor, but going through from starting as a junior to your collegiate career to your amateur career, at the club pro level, the professional level, you've made the Masters cut, won over 12 USGA medals. That was really, really cool to see. So I guess if you just let our listeners know how you got into the game and learned it, I think that would be a great start for us.
Well, thanks, Steve. It's nice to be with you. I'm in the car, as you can see, but it's nice to be talking with you. I started in Seattle. I grew up right next to a golf course. I played all sports, and then my dad was a good player. He was an engineer for Boeing aircraft. My mom played, so I started playing. I started having success as a kid, and so I stopped playing baseball. I continued playing basketball, and then I had a good, I won the state junior a few times, and was successful in the Western Junior, the U.S. Junior, and got a scholarship, 4-year scholarship to Houston. At the time, they were the #1 college program in the country. I played at Houston, lettered for 3 years. My sophomore year, we won the NCAA. My last 2 years, well, they also won it my freshman year, and then we finished second my last 2 years at school in Houston. I won 3 college tournaments. I lived with great players, and then I played with guys that won all 4 majors. Fuzzy Zeller won the Masters and the U.S. Open. Bill Rogers, my roommate, won the British Open, and one of my other roommates, John Mahaffey, won the PGA. So we had on the team in Houston, we had 40 guys in a dormitory when I started, and 5 guys played. So it was really competitive right at the school. So that was a great start for me.
That's amazing. Just a little bit of high level. How do you think about in terms of a golfer going to instructor, and maybe being concerned that, hey, the instructors doesn't have a great playing background. Should I trust their advice? And I know teaching and playing are 2 different, things, and you can be a great teacher and maybe not a great player, but you're obviously in that camp where you were both. So how do you think about that? Does that maybe make you stand out a little in terms of some of the other top instructors who don't have that playing background?
Well, I wasn't a great tour player, that's for sure. I did pretty good in club professional live mini tour stuff. I did pretty good, but I think a lot of teachers, coaches in other sports were pretty good. They played professional level or top college golf, top college football or basketball. I definitely think it helps a lot, but it doesn't mean you can't be a good teacher without playing credentials. For me, I look #1 almost for the guys, the young people, boys, girls that we hire to have a playing background. Not that they're great players, but they've been in the struggle. They've worked hard on their own games. They know what it's like to play in tournament golf, feel pressure. But if you love golf and study it and have a knack for teaching, I think you can do very well as a professional teacher, coach. But I think it's more difficult.
Right. Well, and you mentioned what you look for in the people you hire. One of the things that stood out was you had over 260 of your assistants go on to become head professionals, director of golf, director of instruction around the world. So those are your disciples. How does that make you feel, as someone who's had that much impact on so many up and coming teachers?
Well, I was a director of golf up in New York. I was in New York for 19 years in the Met section. You know, it was definitely one of the top sections, if not the top in the country. So I had to learn service at very high end clubs. I have been very interested in learning myself. So the training was very important for me as a head professional um, in New York. And then I brought that down to Miami when I started my first school at Doral. And we've had Monday meetings ever since. We do an hour and a half training session every Monday. They become pretty well known, really. Um, that's been very important to us. Our young guys have another meeting they go to during the week. It's usually been a Wednesday or Thursday night for another hour of assistant training. Our assistants have a lot to do. They do observe lessons, but then there's some very tough testing on the couple books I've written where they need to know it really well. Uh, so it takes usually a year at the facility to get certified. Sometimes it's longer, but some really advanced people do it quicker. And then at my other schools now, the directors have been trained here, but they then do some training now. I think we've done better with our written materials for teaching. And there's so many things they can watch on YouTube now or Instagram. So it's much easier to get trained.
And in terms of, the Jim McLean Academy, for our listeners that might want to learn more, like what's a typical day look like, if they come and participate in some of your instruction?
Well, one of the things we do more than almost anywhere else is golf schools. So we do a lot of our number one school is a 3-day school, which involves on the golf course training as well. We've stayed with that, and I think that experience for people where they can immerse themselves in the golf learning experience for 3 days is really beneficial. I think we can get a lot done. Sometimes we do 2-day schools. I also do some 4-day schools. I used to do 6-day schools, but that seems to be a little too much now. But I do some 4-day golf schools. Um, we have it at the Biltmore now. I've moved over to the Biltmore 6 years ago. We have 17 teachers and 7 assistants during the season. We keep 12 year round. We have another pretty big golf school over at Miami Beach, right? So we have 2 in Miami. They're about 45 minutes apart. Yeah. So we obviously we do a tremendous amount of individual instruction, 1, 2, 3 hour type of instruction as well.
Oh, that's amazing. I know you have multiple locations, some overseas and I think Korea and Spain. So definitely our listeners check those locations out and find some dates that work for you. What would you say? I know it's, your game can't be transformed over a few days, but what are some experiences you've found your students have seen after taking the courses and sharing their feedback with you?
Well, we keep track of the improvement that we get back from our questionnaires and we do callbacks, et cetera. So I feel like, our number's been about dropping the handicap four shots because we do a lot of short game work, putting, chipping, pitching, bunker work during those 3 days, which most people don't take putting lessons. They don't take chipping lessons. They don't take pitching lessons. They know they should, but they don't. Most people in private instruction are very interested in the driver and full swing. That takes up a lot of private lessons in the world around the world. But during the school you can do more of the whole game and on course management and mental training as well. We can get some of that in, so that's very helpful. I am going over to my school in Madrid, and well, I'm speaking to the Spanish Federation on October 16th and 17th, but I'm going to be at my golf school during that time in Madrid. It's at Banco Santander, which is one of the biggest banks in Europe. They have a tremendous facility over there, and I'm going to be teaching, there as well.
That's all. So when did you say that date was?
Oh, I'm speaking for 2 days, October 16th and 17th in
Wow.
Madrid. I'm also speaking in Paris, in France, to the French Federation in the end of September, end of this month.
Wow.
So we head over on September 20th.
That's really exciting. Just just kind of skipping onto the broader impact of technology and instruction and golf. Just kind of curious how you think about technology and how you utilize it with your students. And then maybe want to get your thoughts on where you see the future is going and kind of dive into a few technologies. I know there's some that we've worked on together, Golf Boost,
Yeah,
and then the Genius Ball project we're working on. So I guess,
yeah.
yeah, maybe just start with kind of how you use it today and then where you see it going, and then we can dive into some of those subtopics.
Yeah, I love technology. I've tried to stay on top of, right on the leading edge of what's going on. So we've got new force plates this year. We just moved over. It's called Smart to Move, and obviously very big on the video. And we have foresight quads, and yeah, so all that stuff's really important. Golf Boost has been something with OnCore that I've worked on for many years ago, started with, which is an unbelievable application, and I continue to feel like it's going to be successful because it's so easy for the user, just to flip on your phone and get good instruction. I shot a lot of uh, information for different parts of the golf swing on that, so I'm hopefully that's gonna work. And then of course this Genius Ball that you guys are working on, where it can give foresight quad information on my phone when the person hits a golf ball. You know, that's really exciting. And I know you're getting closer and closer to that. I'm speaking to Keith later on today, actually, about the Genius Ball and Golf Boost. So I know you guys at OnCore are really doing some really, really interesting things. And, particularly for me, I guess the Golf Boost was something like we started probably 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, it's kind of with Golf Boost, you were definitely ahead of the curve on the AI. And now, with ChatGPT and you can't open a paper or a newsletter without reading about advances in AI, and it's really accelerating. So for our listeners, definitely, if you get a chance, download Golf Boost, check it out. It was built, the universal swing methodology was built with Jim's input on, the fundamentals of the swing, right? And that kind of is a good segue into the X Factor. I know it's something you pioneered, that book and that system, and maybe just for our listeners that aren't familiar, a little bit of high level on that, maybe how you started and maybe how it's evolved today.
I wrote an article for Golf Magazine. I was writing for them in the early 1990s, a long time ago. I wrote a book on the 4 turns on the golf swing, which was the rotation of the head through the rotation of the shoulders, the rotation of the hips, and the angle on your knee rotation on the backswing. They thought it was too complicated, so we went to two turns, which were the 2 big turns, the shoulders and the hips or the pelvis. The differential between the shoulders and the hips is called the X factor, that amount of difference between the two. And then when you start down, the separation of the pelvis from the shoulders, that it starts ahead of the shoulders. So the shoulders are still rotating back and the lower body is starting forward in a high level golf swing. Now that doesn't happen, of course, with everybody, but I thought that with the shoulders and the hips, that the ideal had been 90 degrees of shoulder turn and 45 degrees of hip turn. And a lot of people still think that's ideal, but it really isn't for the longer hitters, the best players. They rotate their shoulders more than 90 degrees. Most of them, not everybody, but most everybody more than 90 degrees, up to 120 degrees of shoulder turn. And then the lower body, I had a ratio way back then between 40 degrees and 65. And that's remained very close. It's less, actually. I kind of got criticized for too much resistance in the lower body with the X Factor. But it turns out that some of the longest hitters have even less than 40 degrees of hip rotation. And then they get this huge differential. Say, well, let's say if we had 100 degrees of shoulder turn and 40 degrees of hip turn, that's a 60-degree gap. And then if you start a little bit with the lower body, that increases that gap maybe to 65 or 70 degrees. And then the shoulders can just rip through the ball. So it's definitely one way of looking at how to increase power in the golf swing, or how to study the golf swing.
Yeah, and undoubtedly, a lot of that went over my head. But
Okay.
I intuitively it makes sense, and our listeners, I'm sure, will understand better than me. It's funny that you've identified these ratios that have held over time, because I just read about a system that looked at tempo and found this 3-to-1 ratio where all the greats from, Jack, Tiger, Phil, they all have different, back swings and different, looking swings, but the timing of the backswing and the downswing, I believe, being 3 times faster, that ratio seemed to hold across all the great players. And there's some apps out there that give you the audio feedback, so you can kind of time when you're at your top of your swing and when you're at impact, and try to match up with some of those greats out there and improve your tempo. And I know Bobby Clampett has been big on the impact, and how all the greats are different, different swings, but impact is pretty consistent. So definitely a contribution on your part to analyzing swings and really noting those commonalities across all different kinds of golfers. With that said, are there any new books, videos? I know you've had some big production crews over to your offices. I won't mention who, because I don't know what's public yet, but what's kind of in the pipeline for fans and listeners?
Well, I'm writing a follow-up to the X Factor. It's going to be, I think, X Factor 2, pretty simple. On what's the latest and greatest, the news on biomechanics of what the body's doing in the golf swing. When I wrote the X Factor, and the 8-step swing, I talked about the sit down move and pushing up out of the ground, the hips rise. But now with ground reaction force out of biomechanics, there's more information, better information. So I'm going to try and get the greatest, latest information on the X Factor, which the whole book was what is the body doing in the swing? Because previous to the X Factor, mostly was arms and hands. What's the shaft doing in the club face, and which is always a very important part of my teaching, by the way. But there wasn't anything really written about what is the body doing in the swing. And we know that in top players, more advanced players, low handicap golfers, that they use their body much, much different than the higher handicap, the beginners, infrequent golfers. They don't have a sense of how to move the body, or let's say they're not doing it. So that book is something I'm almost done with. Been working on that. I'm working on these speeches, getting ready for the season. I just got back from a trip out west. I was at my school in Utah, and then I went out to the West Coast and played a lot of golf out there.
Great.
So I'm kind of ready to get back to work back in Miami now, and Steve,
How's that?
I've kind of got to run, man. I've got to go right
Yeah.
here. But it's been
No.
great talking to you, and I'd love to
Yeah.
do it again.
And I know you had some unexpected things come up and needed to be in the car. So our listeners certainly will understand and appreciate all the great insights. We'll link out to your site, your schools, and add the link when the new book is ready. But yeah, this was been great. And just real quick, the website for the listeners or the best way to find you online.
Yeah, just JimMcLean.com. They can get
Great.
everything, and then I'm McLean Golf on YouTube or on Instagram.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Jim.
Thank you, Steve. I really
Yep.
appreciate it. Bye
Awesome.
bye.
Be well. Thank you.